Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Digging Deeper moment number 171. We are so glad that you've joined us. If you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please remember to do so because it really helps us spread messages like this one to others. Thank you. Today we begin a new series called The Bible That Jesus Used. The Bible has 39 books in the Old Testament and 27 in the New Testament. The Jewish Bible used by Jesus only had the Old Testament, and it included the same 39 books that our Bible has, but they were arranged quite differently. This arrangement has a bearing on the story the Old Testament is telling, and this is what we're going to look at in this series. We're going to start with what's most familiar to us, the arrangement of our Bible in our Old Testament. The Old Testament in the Bible is arranged according to the Septuagint translation. That means we're talking about the Greek translation, which was translated sometime around 200 BC. It's a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, so they translated the Hebrew into Greek. I covered this in detail in Digging Deeper moment number 102, which you can find on our website, www.eaglesnest.ch. What we saw in that Digging Deeper moment was that the Old Testament has four sections which we liken to a house. The foundation, that's the Torah, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The floor is the historical books of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. The walls and windows of the house are the wisdom books of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. The roof is the prophets, the major prophets of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and the minor prophets of Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Now, the Bible used by Jesus had these same 39 books that we just read about, but as we stated, they were arranged or organized differently. Actually, the manuscripts of the Old Testament are found in approximately 70 different arrangements. So when scholars look at the manuscripts, there's a lot of different ways that the manuscripts are organized. But these 70 different ways can be classified into three types. Whenever we're dealing with a lot of numbers, I like to try to group them because I can't remember 70, but I can remember 3, but not 70. This is a very important point, as we'll see in our study. But the three types of arrangements are, number one, chronologically. That is, that the manuscripts are organized or ordered in the order that they thought they were written. Secondly is what they call liturgically. That is, in the order in which passages were read in the synagogue services. One of the things that happened in Jesus' time is they would process through the Torah through every year and through the prophets in a reading pattern. That was a liturgy. And so some of the manuscripts are arranged in that order according to when they would be spoken of in the synagogue. The last one, the literary rational, is actually the original one. The other two, the chronological and liturgical, came later in history. And more importantly, the literary rational is the one accepted and adopted by Jesus and his apostles in the New Testament. Now, unfortunately, this arrangement was not preserved in Christian tradition, most likely due to Greek influence on the church after the 1st century AD. In fact, much of Christianity's Jewish roots were obscured or forgotten by the church over the centuries, and it's only in modern times that these roots are once again being exposed and appreciated. Now, the Apostle Paul warned of this in the book of Romans when he wrote to the Gentile Christians there. By the way, Gentiles are non-Jews, but he writes in Romans 11:18, he says, "Do not boast against the branches," that's the Jews. "But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root," that would be the Jewish nation, "but the root supports you." He says again in Romans 11:25, "For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery." The mystery is something revealed or hidden but now revealed. "Lest you should be wise in your own opinion." In other words, don't get proud. "That blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in." Regrettably, history records that often the Church of Christ has failed to heed this warning. But as Philip Yancey writes in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew, I can no more understand Jesus apart from his Jewishness than I can understand Gandhi apart from his Indianness. I need to go back, way back, and picture Jesus as a 1st century Jew with a phylactery on his wrist and Palestinian dust on his sandals. I would add that this applies to the entire Bible, both the Old and New Testaments as well. Now, the Old Testament used by Jesus was divided into three sections, and Jesus himself refers to these in Luke 24:44, which is the literary rational method. Listen to Luke 24:44. "Then he said to them, These are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me." These three things that he mentions are the divisions of the Jewish Bible used by Jesus and used in the literary rational arrangement of the Old Testament in the Jewish Bible. The first was the law, the second was the prophets, and then the writings. The late F.F. Bruce writes in his book, The Canon of Scripture, he says, the books of the Hebrew Bible are traditionally 24 in number, that's our 39, arranged in three divisions. So we have 39 books in our Old Testament, but they're really 24 in the Hebrew Bible, as we'll see in just a moment, and they're arranged in three sections, which is what we're saying. The first section of the Hebrew Bible is the law, which is called the Torah. And it really literally means instruction or direction. It has 5 books, just like the beginning of our Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But the second section is called the Nevi'im, and that's the prophets. It has 8 books. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, but by the way, Samuel is 2 books in our Bible. Kings, 2 books in our Bible. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the book of the 12 prophets, or what we call the minor prophets. We'll say more about this next week. The third section is the Ketuvim, the writings. It has 11 books, and the first book is Psalms. That's why Jesus called it the Psalms, because it's the first book in that section, and therefore it was often called that. After this is Proverbs, Job, Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. So let's review what we said today. The Old Testament in our Bible has 39 books, and they are arranged according to the Greek translation called the Septuagint. The 39 books of our Old Testament are the same 24 books found in the Jewish Bible used by Jesus, but they are arranged quite differently. These 24 books are arranged in 3 sections, and this is where we'll pick it up next week. If this lesson has helped you, please share it with a friend, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or check out our Sunday morning live podcast on either Apple or Spotify. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do that. It will help us greatly. I hope to see you next week.